today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired.
This is your Daily Dose of Happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
Louis and Anne-Marie can't join us today. Louis's got a little internet issue going on, so he can't connect, and Anne-Marie's got some family stuff going on, so she won't be joining us this week either. I believe, let's see, where we're at the 12th as we're recording this, so I believe next week we'll have Anne-Marie, but not Louis, so just kind of prepare for that, but that's okay. I still have a guest joining me today. This is going to be a fun interview. This is going to be really, really fun. This guy's name is Vic Ferrari. He's a former New York Police Department officer. And this guy's got stories. It's one of those things, you hear about people who have been in the department for years. Many of them won't say anything about what they're doing. Others will say some stuff. A few are tell-all. This guy's in the third category. He just tells everything. So we're going to hear some great stories today. This is going to be fun. So Vic Ferrari, thank you for joining me. First of all, how you doing?
I'm great, Walt. Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Glad to have it. Give us the potted biography. How long were you with the department?
I grew up in the Bronx, lower middle class kid. Always wanted to be a New York City police officer and detective. I joined the academy and I went into the police department in 1987. I retired 2007. I did 20 years on the head.
Nice. All right. Yeah. And this is something I've always worried about. I know that to a large degree, it makes a difference just how passionate you are about your job, but it's a job that can wear you down a lot. And did you find that after 20 years you were done, or did you find that you were done before that, or could you have kept going, but you changed your mind because of other stuff? What was your mindset at that point?
It's funny you should say that because I never gave retirement. I never thought of it. Even getting hired, I didn't even know what a pension was. I wanted action. I wanted to, get into car chases and arrest bad guys.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, everything a little boy, cops and robbers. Mm-hmm. And things were changing. The department was changing. I was in the same office for 10 years. And probably about a year and a half before I got out, I started looking around the office and I said, I've been here 8.5, 9 years. The personnel has changed so much. There's younger people coming in with different ideas, and everybody outlives their usefulness. That's the truth in life and any job. And I said, I look no further that I had a lieutenant that did close to 40 years with the NYPD, and he loved it. But loving the NYPD is like loving something that's never going to love you back. And sometimes it can turn on you. So I said, get out when the going is good.
Okay.
And I retired after 20. I started counting down the days a year and a half before, and I started making my exodus plans of, what I was going to do and so forth.
And what have you done since you left?
Well, I moved down to Florida. After 20 years with the NYPD, I became a cop down here in Florida for a small police department. And the funny thing is, so I went from working in America's largest police department, working with organized crime cases, to now I'm back on the road. And it was like getting thrown into a bad episode of Reno 911. Now I'm chasing guys. Now at 40 years old, right? And that's a young man's game, being on the road. I'm chasing dirtbags that are hiding under kiddie pools in the middle of the night. And I'm back to doing, dealing with domestic violence and drunk driving. And I said, what did I do? I thought I wanted this again. And I was like, no. So I re-retired. And at the bequest of friends and family, they said, you got all these, great stories. Why don't you start writing them? And I was hesitant. But like you said, I said, if I'm going to do this, I don't want to get anybody divorced or in trouble. So with my books, I changed the names, the dates, the ranks, the location.
Okay.
But these things have happened. It's just I move things around. I'm not a sour grapes kind of guy.
Right.
If I catch somebody, I'm not going to out them or humiliate them. That's just not the way I roll.
That's good, and I like that, and that's a good solution. Just treating it like a fiction story, but it's not a fiction story. Just change the names and. Now it's more generic. It's not, oh, well, that's what this guy did, or that's what that officer did, or anything like that. Yeah, okay. And well, it's also smart too, because you maintain your friendships that way.
Oh yeah, and yeah. So when I wrote these books, I'm telling you, I went through all the process of self-publishing, and my finger was on that enter button to upload it onto Amazon.
Right.
And I said, do I, I've done a year and a half of my life investing in this. Do I really is there going to be blowback? And there wasn't. I mean, everybody started reaching out to me like, I know who you're talking about in this story. You should have wrote about this guy. And I thought my critics, they were coming out of the woodwork and they're like, no, fuck this guy. You should have wrote about this. Now I have my friends feeding me things and reminding me of things.
No kidding. Is that why you said before we got started that you'd written 4 books about your experience? Is that why you wrote more than one?
I wrote the first one and just as a fluke to see what would happen, and it started selling. And then in the reviews, we'd love to hear more of these stories. And I said, all right, give them what they want. So sure. I just started writing about a book a year.
Okay, all right. Do you have more coming on that subject?
Yeah, as we speak, I'm writing another NYPD theme book.
Okay, very good. Yeah. And then you told me you have 2 other books you've written. Tell us about those.
Yeah, I wrote my latest is called Confessions of a Catholic High School Graduate. It's got a picture of a kid getting chased out of a confessional. And yes, that did happen to me.
Really?
Yeah, confessing one sin too many to an angry Irish priest who wants to go home to dinner can lead to a foot chase to an empty church. Yeah, growing up in the Bronx, I was in 8th grade, and my dad said, next year you go to Catholic high school. I was like, what? We don't even go to mass. Like, what? And he goes, no, you're a clown. And if I send you to public school, you're going to be a bigger clown. So pick a school run by the men in black. And that's exactly what happened. And I didn't want to go to Catholic high school, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me other than the NYPD. And it instilled discipline in me. And the teachers, they were rough on us, but they cared. You know what I mean? It was, I came from public school, and like I write in one of the stories, as long as we didn't smell or make too much noise, no one said anything to us. Catholic high school was the first couple of months was like going to a prison. You know what I mean? There was no screwing around, and there was corporal punishment back then. So, if you stepped out of line, you'd get a crack. And, I go into that about corporal punishment. And I mean, did I get hit sometimes when I didn't deserve it? Yeah, but it more than made up for the times that I got away with things. So it all kind of evened out at the end of the day.
Now I have to ask this one too. Which is the tougher kind of person, a nun or a lieutenant?
Oh, a nun. Oh yeah, a nun. There's a story in my book. My friend lived across the street from Preston High School. We used to play wiffle ball, and we'd play wiffle ball watching the girls come out of school. We weren't even into wiffle ball. We wanted to watch the girls come out.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, while we were doing that shit, J-Lo was going to Preston High School. I mean, she was.
Oh, no kidding.
But yeah, she was going to that school. So we would hit the wiffle balls, and they would go over the fence, and then we would go into the grounds of Preston and traipse through the English garden. And the nuns would warn us, stop coming in here. We don't want you in here. Then they started locking the gate, and then we started hopping the fence. And then they went undercover. They traded in their outfits for pantsuits and Mary Janes. And one day I'm in there collecting wiffle balls, and a couple of them came behind a tree and said, don't move. And I got a couple of nuns pointing finger guns at me. And I took off running. I hopped the fence, and I told my friend, I said, I'm never going back there again. So there's a couple of stories in there about nuns, but yes, definitely. And I actually recovered. I actually got 2 nuns who stole a Mother Superior's car. Well, Mother Superior was away for the weekend. These 2 nuns in Westchester County stole Mother Superior's car, and they went for a shopping spree in the Bronx.
Really?
And they parked their car in a pizzeria parking lot that had one of those signs you will be towed if you don't eat in this restaurant.
Right.
They get their car towed, and we get flagged down by these 2 attractive young women in nuns' outfits. And I thought, in that neighborhood, you had the College of Mount St. Vincent and Manhattan College. So I thought it was a sorority prank. So I got these 2 crying nuns, and they're young. I mean, they're only a couple of years older than me. And they're going on about Mother Superior's car, and we don't have $100 and we can't get it out. Can you talk to the tow guy? And I started believing them. I put these 2 nuns in the car. I go to this tow yard. And if anyone's ever gotten their car towed, people in the towing business, they're not nice. They're not sympathetic to your plight. They don't give a shit that you got your car towed. It's F you pay me. So I tried sweet talking this guy. He wouldn't go for it. I went back to the precinct. I went to my locker. I got some money. And if you've ever lent anybody money, you know what a pain in the ass is getting it back. I give this nun $100, and she swears on a stack of Bibles she's going to pay me. That's my phone number. And she goes, I will call you. I'll get your money. It's yeah, okay, no problem. I figured I'm never going to see or hear from this woman again. about 3 weeks later, I was between apartments. I was in my early 20s, so I'm living with my parents. And back then there's no cell phones, and I come through the door. And my dad goes, "Sister Samantha called looking for you." And I said, "Oh, all right, you got the number?" And he goes, "Sister Samantha." And I go, "Dad, she's a nun. She's not a Motown singer." And he goes, "What? A nun? It's really a nun calling here?" So I call the nun back at the rectory or the nunnery or whatever you want to call it, convent. And it was like a Cloak and Dagger movie. I went up to Westchester County. I went to this park that was a couple of blocks from the convent, and I sat on a park bench feeding ducks. And she came like through the woods with an envelope. It's like a spy movie.
It's like a drug deal is what that is.
Yeah. So she had a drop, right? A dead drop. So she hands me an envelope with $100, and she's thanking me and thank you so much. And please keep this under your hat. And, Mother Superior would be very upset. I said, I'm not going to, who am I going to tell? You know what I mean? But, and it was funny because I said, you're a young woman. I said, like, you sure this is the right path you chose? And she goes, yeah. What about you? And I said, yeah, I'm happy with it. And I never saw her again. Called her a couple of times. We kept in touch for about a year or so. And then I, kind of fell out. But yeah, there's never a dull moment in the NYPD.
Apparently, yeah. Now, there are lots of reputations, mostly perpetrated by television and movies, about what New York and New York crime is like. What's the truth?
As far as?
Well, in comparison to what we see on television or in the movies.
Oh, well, the only television show that gets it right, in my opinion, is Law and Order. Because you have a crime committed, detectives show up, they're interviewing people, they're going back and forth with the district attorney's office, they're building a case, they go lock the guy up, then there's interviews, and then it goes to trial. On regular television shows, like I always love on TV shows and movies where the cops get into a shooting and like later that night they're in a bar having a couple of cocktails. It doesn't work that way. Say you and I are doing a 7 to 3 shift, 7 in the morning till 3 at night. And 8 o'clock in the morning, me and you walk into a bank rob. Best case scenario, there's a guy walking out of a bank, guns ablazing, right? Mm-hmm. Me and you kill the guy. We get into a gun battle, we kill the guy, right? 100 witnesses saw it, right? It's a good shooting, if there ever is such a thing as a good shooting, but that's what we call a good shooting. No problems whatsoever, right? Bad shooting's bad for business. So what happens is we get interviewed by a sergeant, a lieutenant, a captain from the borough, internal affairs, detectives. A district attorney is going to show up at some point with a stenographer and take a statement. If we kill that guy at 8 o'clock in the morning, we're not going home till like 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. We could be there close to 24 hours, if not longer.
Wow.
And then within 5 days, that district attorney is going to run witnesses and us before a grand jury to see if our actions were justified. So you're sitting there between 16 and 23 people in a room. They're having a bad day and they don't like the police and they're like, you know what, screw them. We vote to indict. Guess what? You're getting arrested. You get your guns and shield taken from you, and you got to hire a lawyer and pray to God you get a bench trial where you get a sympathetic judge. So it's not like TV, like cops are crashing cars and it's no big deal. You start crashing cars, you'll be on foot for the rest of your life. Like, and I've seen that happen with guys that keep getting into car accidents. Sometimes not even their fault. They don't want to hear it. So yeah, with civil liability and shootings and everything else, it's not like, you get a smack on the wrist and that's the end of it. There's checks and balances in place.
So in terms of your own experience then, did you find yourself in that kind of soup on numerous occasions? Was it one time? Was it never? How did it work out?
More than I'd like to admit. I was an active cop. I was involved in a lot of things. I've also had friends. I've never, had to discharge my weapon, but I've had friends that have killed people. I've had friends that were shot. I've had friends that were killed. So, I mean, there's a lot going on in New York. I mean, you've got 35,000 NYPD members at any given time, and you've got 9 million people scattered across the 5 boroughs.
Right.
So, I mean, it's nonstop.
But you didn't ever discharge your weapon. I think that's something else that is perhaps a myth. But like, how many? Like, give us like your best guess, rough percentage of officers that never discharge their weapon.
Most.
Probably.
I mean, probably probably less than 5% of NYPD cops retired ever discharge their weapon.
Mm-hmm. So the idea of guns blazing, like we'll tend to see on television movies, that's rare.
No, and the reality is 99% of cops are more afraid of getting in trouble than getting killed.
Mm.
I mean, me and my friend, we never considered getting, especially when we were young, you wouldn't be effective in your job if you thought you could face your own mortality. As you get older, you start thinking about it. But no, my first 17, 18 years, that wasn't going to happen to me.
Does that protect you? The mindset?
Ignorance is bliss. Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because we talk about mindset a lot. With law of attraction, you get mindset as like the top thing to talk about, and it's fun to kind of apply it to various aspects of life. What happens when you have a certain mindset in this area or in that area, and most of us, of course, have no real association other than television movies, with what the mindset and what the activities are of a police officer. So that's why I'm kind of curious to know. Okay, so what is your mindset? What are you thinking about? Because I mean, just talking to Neo Positivity, who does the Friday show with me, he was a Camden, New Jersey officer, and he often makes reference to chasing bad guys down alleys and so forth. But when he talks about it, he doesn't go into details about whether he had to kill anybody or anything like that. It's more like just arrests that he would have to make, and that's the way he would think about it. And I've always felt that in the years that he was an officer, he never really had a shooting situation or something like that because his mindset just didn't go that way. And so the scenarios he was in would play out as a result because of his mindset. And so that's why I'm kind of curious. I think listeners are probably curious to know, to what degree do you think your mindset actually controlled the way events played out?
Oh, I mean, I came close a handful of times to shooting somebody, and I would have been justified both times. Two that I can remember right off the top of my head. And it was one of those things where one time I gave the person the benefit of the doubt, and I'm so glad that I did. My partner and I, came over as a domestic or some kind of call on a multi-family building, and we were at one end of the hallway. We're banging on the door, and another door opened down the hall, and the kid, probably about 17 years old, comes running out of the apartment with a handgun.
Ooh.
And I just turned, and I mean, I don't know, just the look on his face just didn't match what was going on. And I said, drop that fucking gun. And he dropped it. And it was a toy. He was playing with his nephew or brother or whatever. And they were playing cops and robbers in the apartment. They weren't in the street, but he went to run out in the hallway. He didn't know we were out there.
Right.
And he came running out, and he was looking one way. And when he turned, I just saw the look of horror in his face. And it wasn't, I can't explain it, but it wasn't the look of fear like, oh shit, I'm going to get arrested. It was so innocent. And he dropped it instantly. And thank God I didn't have to, I didn't shoot him, because, I'd have to live with that.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, even if I was cleared, I'd have to live with that for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? I would have felt terrible about it. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, it can happen.
That just, to me, that just reinforces the whole idea that mindset makes a difference. Your mindset, however you would define it, from my perspective, your mindset was, I'm not looking to do anything to fan flames. I'm trying to find ways to calm flames. That's my ongoing mindset. And in this case, I was able to justify to myself on a split-second decision. No, this is a flame to be calmed. It's not one to be fanned.
Yeah, another time I was driving the sergeant, and we rolled up on the street, and there was this woman. She couldn't have been 100 pounds. She was running around with a carving knife, and she's chasing her boyfriend around mailboxes, through parked cars. And I mean, she wasn't putting on a show. She was lunging at him, like she was putting her weight into it.
Like you knew it.
Yeah, it wasn't an act. Mm-hmm. And we jumped out of the car, and we're screaming at them, right? The boyfriend runs behind my sergeant and starts crawling up his back, like, away from me, right? And she comes charging at him with that knife up. And I'm screaming at her, and she's not listening to me. And I'm just kind of drawing down, and I'm going to shoot her. And another cop who I didn't even see, had saw the commotion too and jumped out of his car. And you ever watch a football game, like when the quarterback is just about to throw the ball and he gets blasted and just kind of gets blasted out of the screenshot?
Right.
Just before I shot her, another cop blasted her, just tackled. He was big as a bear, this guy. Knocked her and the knife tumbling over.
Right.
And the boyfriend didn't want to press charges. My sergeant was so pissed. He goes, "You're an asshole." He goes, "Are you kidding me?" Like the boyfriend, like, was hiding behind him and almost got the sergeant killed, because while the sergeant was turning, trying to get this guy off his back, she was coming at them with that knife. You know what I mean?
Wow.
He's like, "I love her. I don't want to press charges." Like, get the fuck out of here.
Wow, that's crazy. Oof. Well, that also raises an interesting question, because I think anyone who's ever watched any of these kinds of programs, part of the reason they watch it is because they're watching dramas. And what was playing out in front of you there that you were actually in the scene part of was a drama, a major drama. It was a potentially violent drama. And I think part of the reason we like dramas is because we're asking ourselves questions like, how did she get into that frame of mind in the first place? What was going on that just made her completely lose it?
Well, she's a crackhead. There's a second part of that story. So she gets handcuffed, and actually it was the cop that knocked her over. He was taking the arrest. So he puts her in the back seat of the radio car handcuffed, and he left the window down. And we're sitting there talking to the boyfriend, and everyone's calming down. And the next thing I know, I see her with her hands behind her back, flipping out of the window. Like she came out the window, landed on her head, got up and started running with her hands cuffed behind her back, and we had to chase her again and tackle her and put her back in the radio car.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's so far outside of my own experience that I have trouble even imagining that mindset. I mean, you say she was a crackhead, so okay, there was obviously some sort of addiction thing going on there, but even that, I still can't quite fathom how somebody gets in that mindset. I know that it happens, and we certainly see it dramatized, but it's just amazing.
Well, I mean, you have drugs. You have a situation. I don't know if he was cheating on her, but I mean, domestics can get ugly, right? They can escalate. They can get violent, and then you throw drugs into it. And I think she didn't care what happened to her or him at this point. It was, if I can't have you, no one's going to have you. And we didn't exist. I mean, all the screaming and stuff, I think she glanced at us once. Like, I think she knew we were there, but she didn't care.
She was so focused on her anger, her rage, because that's really what that was. She was rage driven at that point. And when you're in that kind of really negative emotion, that negative vibration, you can't see anything else. That's all you see. It's going to be true for somebody who's in rage, somebody who's in depression, for somebody who's in any of the really negative, really low vibration emotions. It's just, you just can't see anything else. And she's a perfect example of that.
And that's how people get killed or go to jail.
Yeah. Coming out the other side of 20 years, how effective do you think the criminal justice system is?
Now it's broken in many places.
Why is that?
I saw it. So I got hired in the mid 80s, and different boroughs, because I made arrests in different boroughs because I worked in different units. So some places I worked, sometimes some of the district attorneys were more liberal in their thinking. And I used to ask myself sometimes, like after having a conversation with a district attorney who didn't want to prosecute a case or wanted to, we call it a D, which means knock it down from like a felony to a misdemeanor. I'd say to myself, why would they, choose a career and become a prosecutor if you have no interest in prosecuting cases? A lot of them acted, not a lot, but some acted like they had been dropped behind enemy lines and it was their mission to sabotage the criminal justice system.
Really? Interesting.
Not a lot, but I mean, it looks like there's more of it now. But back then, yeah, I mean, I remember, it's in one of my books, I locked up these 3 guys with 4 kilos of coke on a car stop. And back then, in the old days, we didn't test drugs. We sent it to the lab. So if you locked up somebody with a dime bag of weed or a nickel of coke, or in the case I had 4 kilos of coke, you didn't test it. You didn't mess with it. You put it in a bag and it got sent off to the lab, and within a couple of days they would test it. And I remember being sitting down with this district attorney one night. It's late, and she's like, "Well, didn't you poke a hole in it and test it?" I go, "Poke a hole in a kilo?" I says, "What, are you kidding me? You know how my job thinks? If I started messing around with a kilo of Coke, I get suspended on the spot." I go, "No, I filled out well, I don't know if I can prosecute this." So I pitched a bitch. I asked to speak to a supervisor. And it's one of those things where I rarely did it, handful of times in my career, because when you go over someone's head, you've just made an enemy.
Right.
So I'm going to have to deal with her again, either on this case or who knows down the road. I might be down there writing up another case. I'm going to get her again. And fortunately for me, I never had to deal with her again. But no, she was going to throw the case out right there. 3 guys, 4 kilos of Coke. And I asked to speak to the supervisor, who wasn't there. They had to reach him at home. He was not too thrilled to be woken up. Then he got pissed off at her. Like, "What are you doing? Why are you giving this cop a hard time?" So, it happened.
I'm also thinking about a former co-host of mine, Rita Gigante, who was the younger daughter of Vinny Gigante.
Oh, I know who she is. Yeah. I've seen her in interviews. She's pretty cool.
She is. She's very cool. She's a wonderful person. But I've also heard her story, and it was, to put it politely, it was traumatic growing up as the daughter of Vinny Gigante. And I imagine you would, I mean, that's a more high profile kind of thing, but I imagine you would see that a lot. Can you talk about what the impact is on people who, through no fault of their own, they're related to somebody who's going through some bad stuff, and they have to end up taking some of the crap themselves?
So some of our cases were with organized crime figures, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny because sometimes we'd go to these people's houses first thing in the morning to lock them up.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole family, I'm sure, like Rita probably could explain much better than me. They're very anti-government, they're very anti-police. And so sometimes they're either, they treat you hostile, or it's almost like, it's like walking into a cult and everybody's going to give the same answer. No one's going to budge. No one's going to. I remember one time we went to lock up. It wasn't my case, but we just got assigned with picking this guy up in Howard Beach, and mobster. And we went to his door at 6 o'clock in the morning. Knock on the door, and he comes down and he's like, "Come on, guys, this early?" "Yeah." And he goes, "State or federal?" So we said state, and he's like, "Oh." So he wasn't as concerned, right? So he figured it's a racketeering thing. You could be doing 30 years, know. So I says, "We're not here for you." And he goes, "What? We're here for your wife." He goes, "My wife?" And I said, "You know that car, that Mercedes that disappeared, that you reported stolen? It was an insurance fraud case. What it was is we had a camera up on a junkyard, a mob-controlled junkyard. So what they would do is they're called give-ups. So if someone has a car and they don't want it anymore, they can't make the payments on it, or their kid threw up in the car on a leased car, and they know, or the mileage is over, so they know if they return it back to the leasing company, they're going to get dumped. It's better just to make the car disappear. Mm-hmm. So we had a camera up on a place, so cars would go in and they'd never come out. Mm-hmm. So we were taking pictures of the license plates. So this Mercedes goes in, it never comes out, and then 2 weeks later, she reports it stolen, saying, that she last had it on the 15th when we saw it go in on the 1st and never come out. So we've got her on insurance for it. So we said, "No, we're here for your wife." And he goes, "My wife?" We go, "The car." And he goes, "Oh." He goes, "Can I talk to her for a minute?" And when I said, "Yeah, go ahead." So he goes into the bedroom and you hear him going back and forth. And she was pissed because it was him. You know what I mean? It was like he's the mobster. He probably told it, "Bring it to Anthony," or "Bring it to tough so-and-so. Or had his son do it or whatever, but she's the registered owner. She filed the report and he wasn't falling on the grenade. But I mean, it was funny. Like, no one said a word, but just like the look of daggers she was giving her husband as we took her out.
Yeah. And that's an excellent example. I mean, because it really is, it can be very traumatic for a family member. And I'm sure she went through some trauma because her husband had taken advantage of his situation with her.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, you talk about Rita. You know what you should ask her? It would be an interesting thing if you ever got her on here again. You should ask her about her uncle, because her uncle, Father Louis Gigante, right? So the Chin had a brother, and it was the perfect cover. His brother was a priest and would come see him, and when he called him, they probably couldn't or wouldn't tap those things. And her uncle was a big shot in the Bronx. He built those Sebco houses for low income families, and I mean, he was a character. I mean, you should ask her about her uncle because he was an interesting guy. I think he just recently passed, but he was a priest. He was a Catholic priest for decades.
That's really interesting. Yeah, the ties are amazing. What happened with stuff like that. I know in Rita's case, what she ended up having to do, and she got a lot of help to get there, was she had to first of all just let go of the fact that her father was who he was and just be okay with it. Like, you know, nothing she could have done about it, nothing that she could have done to change him or anything like that. She just had to kind of let that go and also be willing to accept the fact that she would never get a clear explanation about why he behaved the way he did. But until you get to that point, that's tough. I mean, he's her father, regardless of whatever else he was her blood father.
Yeah, and he was, I mean, even other mobsters, other families were terrified of him. Because they were the Ivy League of the mob, the Genovese. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the other families had a lot more low-hanging fruit, whereas those guys, I mean, they rarely talked on the phone. Rarely. I mean, they'd never say his name because if they got caught talking about him and it came up on a wire, it was a death sentence. So, I mean, yeah, he was an interesting character. I mean, and he got away with it for many years because the FBI went to serve him a subpoena decades earlier, and when his mother let them into the house, and he jumped into the shower with an umbrella. So they figured, oh, he's nuts. You know, he's smiling at them naked in a shower with an umbrella, and they were like, oh, he's nuts. And basically, they stopped looking at him. And that's how he was able to go on and get more powerful because he wasn't getting locked up. He wasn't getting surveilled. You know what I mean? So he was able to run this shell game.
Very interesting. Yeah. Wow. It's just so far out of, you know, out of the experience that any of us have, or that most of us have in our lives, you know, to even be involved with somebody like that. Although more and more people are finding themselves, I think this is largely due to the fact that we are now a very technologically interconnected world. So more and more people find themselves getting, you know, closer connections, if you will, to people who have not necessarily gigantes, but
right. No, I know what you mean.
But people who have, you know, dysfunctionalities. One of the more popular terms that has emerged over the last 10, 15 years is somebody with a narcissistic personality. I mean, that the personality's been around for generations, but only the last 10, 15 years has that become a thing because more and more people are recognizing, well, I dated somebody like that, or, you know, I had a father like that, or I had, you know, a distant cousin or my teacher or something like that.
Well, yeah. And with the internet now, I mean, think about it. Like if I wrote these books, right, it would be difficult for me to get my message out there. So I have to go on podcasts and radio interviews to promote my books and anything that someone will take a chance on purchasing one of my books. But what it also does is, like, to your point, it connects more people, and there's more information out there on a variety of topics. You know what I mean? With people, and then people, like you said, recognize things more like, yeah, I did know somebody like that once, and he sounds just like this person. So it is interesting how technology has brought us together, and there's just so many topics and interests that people can just, with a click, become an expert just watching videos and learning about things.
Including crime. I mean, one of the most popular genres of podcast is crime podcasts. Yeah. I mean, and there are actually a couple of them that have like exonerated people who were, you know, wrongfully convicted of crimes and things like that. And you know, people are just like, they jump all over that stuff. Like, oh, wow, gotta listen to this. I can't believe what was going on, blah, 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 blah. It's fascinating to people. So it isn't necessarily part of their lives, but it's becoming more so because they're paying attention to it.
Oh, I'm just as guilty. I mean, at night, there's a couple of retired mobsters or guys that, you know, no longer in the life that I look for them like every day because I find it fascinating. You know what I mean? Like, and I worked in that world. I'm like, I click on, you know, that's how I know who Rita is. I've seen her on a bunch of podcasts, and I thought she's pretty. And she's like, wow, the Chin had a daughter that's talking. Like, I thought that was like the wildest thing in the world. You know, he'd be turning in his grave, but I mean, it's therapy for her.
Well, she wrote a book called The Godfather's Daughter. I mean, that's basically how she got out there. Yeah,
she copes.
Yeah, she does cope. Plus, she also has she is an amazing psychic. She's
I heard that.
yeah, I mean, really good, really good. She actually helped to identify an illness in another co-host that the co-host didn't know about. It came out through a medical diagnosis a month later. I mean, just mind blowing.
I'm paranoid about my health. I might have to hit her up.
She's really good. And she's a kind person. She's really nice too. Well, that raises another question. I mean, and again, something that gets played up on the media. But is it true? Do police departments ever use psychics?
That's a good question. So I don't know what an NYPD detective office looks like now because everything's computerized. But in the old days, there'd be, if you walked into like the squad, the detective squad, there'd be phone numbers all around the room. It's like almost like when you go into like a grammar school and you've got the ABCs in cursive, right? So like on the walls would be all these phone numbers of different resources that detectives could just pick their head up and give this guy a call, right? This is before cell phones with numbers were stored. And I remember in my precinct, I remember one day seeing psychic and I started laughing, right? So I asked one of the old timers there, who had done a lot of homicides. And I said, psychic? And he goes, yeah. And I says, what's the story with that? Do you ever call them? He goes, that's a wing and a prayer. He says, that's the last thing we'll do, like dead ends. It's not going anywhere. It's, other cases are piling up. Let's just give this a shot. He says, because what will happen is, he says, if we call and we get this person to come and ask them questions and see what they say, he says, we got to do a report for that because that's going to go in that homicide file. And if we wind up catching the bad guy another way, a defense attorney is going to go, what kind of case is this? You called a psychic? You know what I mean? Like, were you that desperate you called a psychic and now you threw handcuffs on my guy and you're charging him with a homicide? He goes, it will muddy the waters, possibly.
Interesting.
So, if a defense attorney picks up on that, because during the discovery phase, you got to hand over all your paperwork. Can't hold anything back. So if that 5 is in there, which it should, if you do a 5 for that, you call this person and utilize them. So he told me, he says, it's a slippery slope using psychics.
Not because of whether or not the psychic is any good, but because of the way the system works.
Well, I think both.
Both. Okay. That's interesting.
I mean, who knows? Maybe there's bad psychics out there.
I'm sure there are. Well, I mean, I think most people who've ever, who are the kinds of people who go, consult with psychics will tell you, I talked to 5 psychics. The only one that was any good was X. The other 5 were just a bunch of crap. So certainly there are a lot of fake psychics out there. There's no doubt about that. And also from what I know about psychics, it's not like somebody is, a voice is saying, okay, if you go underneath the sidewalk at the corner of A and B Street, you'll find a body under there. That's not the way it works. They get an impression. They're trying to interpret the impression. How good are they interpreting their own impression? That can create all kinds of ambiguity. It doesn't mean that they're lying or that they're deceptive. It's just that they're working on so little information. They got this flash, and that's about all they got to work with. So it's not surprising me that they.
I never used one. I don't know that world. It sounds interesting, but I don't know much about it.
I've had a number of psychics and mediums on the program, and they're really interesting people, and they're very often able to nail stuff and so forth. But that's the other thing. Even they can't tell you when they're going to get a flash or something. It's not like they can get it on demand. It's not like going to the convenience store, you got to order a quart of milk or something like that. It's like it's a hope and a prayer in terms of whether they'll get information at all. They just don't know.
Right. It's like a thought that just jumps into their head.
Yeah. It's interesting stuff, but it does create interesting conversations. I think that's what all this is all about in terms of why I decided to have you on the program, because my goodness, it's got all these great stories to talk about.
Thanks.
We like to have stories. We as human beings are story oriented. Everything in all the entertainment in our life is about stories. The news is about stories. Politics is about stories. I mean, stories just like permeate everything. And I think that's one of the reasons why crime shows, police shows are so popular, because they're just loaded with stories. James Bond and all this other kind of stuff. It's just story. But different to live it. I mean, you have stories to tell. You've written 4 books so far. You got a 5th one you're working on. But when you're living a story, it's different, isn't it? I mean, later on you can tell the story. You can kind of put it all together with a nice bow on top. But when you're living it, it's messy, and it's unclear and muddy at times, and you're trying to make sense out of it.
See, I didn't look at it that way because I knew what I wanted to do at an early age. Like I like to tell a story. I used to go into the post office at 10 years old and steal FBI wanted posters off the wall. And then
Did you really?
Yeah, yeah. Me and my friends, we would go into and then we go into the deli and do manhunt. We're 10 years old with FBI wanted posters going around the neighborhood. Like that could be him. You know what I mean? Like, I knew what I wanted to do. You know what I mean? Like I had no fear or reservation in becoming a cop. But I was all in. I had all my chips in. My parents wanted to kill me after high school. Like they wanted me to go to college. I didn't want to go to college, and my father wanted to choke me because his thing. He always used to say, and then what? And I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, I know you want to be a cop. He goes, what if you don't pass the psychological? What if they do an X-ray and there's something wrong and you can't? And he goes, you're killing time. He goes, for a job you may or may not have. And I says, I'm getting that job. I'm telling you, I'm getting that job. And I'm lucky enough. I'm just one of those rare people that I knew what I wanted to do at an early age, and I got to live it. And now I get to live it again. I'm living vicariously through myself, writing books about my experiences. So I didn't look at it as messy back then. Yeah, was things messy? Yeah, but I just couldn't get enough of it. I mean, I
get that. Yeah, I mean,
25 years with overtime at least.
Wow.
I mean, I always worked overtime. I just couldn't get it. They had to throw me out of the door sometimes. I loved it.
No, I didn't mean that your story was confused. I got the very strong impression you knew exactly what you wanted all along, and I love that you felt that way. I'm just meaning that when you're in the midst of, like, you're pursuing a case, you're trying to track down a potential felon or whatever. It's easy later on to say, okay, there was this, and this is what the result was. But when you're in the middle of it, you don't know what the result is. You don't know where it's all going. You know what your procedures are that you follow, but you don't know how it's going to play out. You don't know what's going to happen around the next alley. You don't know what's going to happen when you make the phone call. There's a lot of unknowns. And I was trying to suggest that those unknowns attract us. They're interesting to us. They entice us. They get our attention going. But trying to treat it as a story while you're in the middle of it is kind of crazy because the story's still playing out. You don't know how the story goes yet.
Yeah, for me, it was the chase. It was the action. It was the excitement. It was puzzles and riddles and trying to figure them out. And, I remember sometimes I do it to this day. When I can't figure something out, I take a step back from it. And then I come back a day later or an hour later, and I want to look at it through a different lens. I'll take a walk. I'll play with the dog, something to get my mind off it, and then I'll come back. You know what I mean? And I, to this day, think about cases where I could have done something better or I should have done this. And I mean, these cases are long gone. The statute of limitations are expired. And I was just walking the dog the other day and I was thinking about something. And it just like, I got to let it go. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm retired 15 years. This isn't helping anybody, but it's still playing out in my head. And I guess that's why I'm able to write these books, because of my memory.
Well, it sounds like the writing of the books actually helps you get the memory out too. So it doesn't keep, haunting you in a sense.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when you can get it out, when you can express it, it takes the power out of it. It gives you power over your own mind rather than your mind having power over you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right?
Definitely.
Yeah, it's mental health.
Oh yeah, writing is definitely a form of therapy, because I get to think things out, and then I'll write a story out and then I'll go back to it and I'll change things around and I'll move things around. Or I must sound like a lunatic, but one of the last things I do before I send my book out for a copy edit is, and I've combed through it many times. One of the last things I do is I read it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And reading something out loud, if you write something and you read it, you're like, yeah, that's fine. If you start speaking it, you go, no, that's not coming across right.
That's a great approach. I love that. Yeah, because part of the challenge of writing something is, like you said, you want to have somebody else doing some editing because you need that third viewpoint, so to speak. But part of it is when you're reading your own stuff. I've written one book and I edited another book, and you can just get in an endless loop.
Yes.
Edit, write again, edit, write again, edit, write, and it's like at some point you have to decide to stop.
I think that happens with new writers too. You're right, because it's analysis paralysis.
Right.
And what I learned is once I've gone through it X amount of times and then read it, and the funny thing is I got a 120-pound Irish wolfhound walking around in here somewhere. He does not like it when I start reading out loud. I got to lock him in the room. He'll start howling at it because it's like who's he talking to? You know what I mean? Like I lost my mind. Yeah, and I have two editors. So one is a copy edit. I'll send it out. It'll come back with the track changes, and I read through it. Copy editors don't get my sarcasm, so I have to say, nope, that's really what I meant to say. You're being too literal. Accept those changes, and then when I'm done with that, I send it off for a proofread, and then it comes back, and then I,
so you got down to
disagree with the changes, and then I'm ready to upload it onto Amazon.
That's nice. Well, you've got it down to a science there. That's a sign of experience. All right, so we've kind of danced around a lot of this stuff. We got you to tell one or two stories, but I want to hear a few more stories. So
what would you like to hear?
Well, just before we got started, you were talking about, you asked where I'm from, and I said I'm from Hartford, Connecticut area, and you started going into a story. So tell that story. I mean, I'm curious.
Okay. All right. So it's early 2000, maybe 99, 2000. We had a Chinese national in Brooklyn who was exporting 30 stolen Audis a month to Shanghai.
Wow.
And he got in touch with this Jamaican middleman from the Bronx. He would pay the Jamaican middleman $5,000 a vehicle. The Jamaican guy would pay his car thieves between $500 and $1,000 a vehicle. Cars would get stolen across the 5 boroughs: Long Island, Connecticut, Westchester, Rockland, you name it, because they were doing 30 cars a month.
Yeah.
They would take these stolen cars, they'd park them on the street, they'd let them cool off, make sure they didn't have low jack or GPS. They would go to the warehouse a couple at a time. They had Chinese nationals working in the warehouse. They'd put 2 stolen vehicles per shipping container. They'd let the air out of the tires so the car would sit low. Then they'd build a wooden frame above it and put another 1 or 2 cars in there. So they were getting 3 to 4 stolen vehicles per shipping container.
Wow.
Then they'd call this legit trucking company and they'd give them a bogus manifest. The container with the 4 cars would go out to Newark. Out in Jersey, they get loaded on trains, and then they get railed across the United States to Shanghai, China, to Long Beach, California. They're put on cargo ships and shipped out to Shanghai. So
that's unbelievable. I mean, that alone right there is just amazing, because you've got these legitimate carriers involved in something they don't even know what they're involved in.
No, and they changed the VIN number. If memory serves me correctly, they were changing the VIN numbers. This is over 20 years ago. So what winds up happening is we've got Chinese detectives monitoring the Asian wiretaps. We've got Spanish cops monitoring the car thieves' phones. And they start talking about whacking this one and whacking that one. And we're like, oh, shit, like these guys are in the murder for hire business. So one of the guys in the case committed a homicide. Well, there's a bunch of them involved in the planning of this. And don't quote me on it. It's over 20 years ago. I wasn't that involved in that particular case, but 10 years before, there were 3 guys knocking off banks or armored cars. I forget. One guy gets caught, keeps his mouth shut. This is up in Hartford, I think. And one guy goes to jail, and the other 2 guys don't, if memory serves me correctly. And he gets out of jail years later, goes to his 2 friends and says, I want, my share. And these guys had taken the proceeds from the bank robberies or whatever they were doing, and they were major players in Connecticut moving weight. Like if you wanted a kilo of coke or heroin, you went through these guys. Well, they treated this guy who just got out of jail as a lackey. Go collect money from this one, go beat up this guy, go whack this guy. He didn't like it. So he kidnapped one of their couriers, and he put the guy in the trunk of his car for a weekend.
Wow.
Tortured the guy, took the kilos, and sent him back with a message to his 2 old friends and said, tell him I'm not fucking around. So now he's got to go, right? So in the drug world, there's no back and forth. There's no mediating. Someone's got to go. So the guys in Connecticut got in touch with our car thieves before they were our car thieves, and they set up a plan. They followed this guy around on a motorcycle, And when the guy stopped at a light, one guy was on the back of the motorcycle. He emptied a 9mm into the guy, like
Wow.
put him into Swiss cheese. They drove off with the motorcycle. They put the motorcycle in a U-Haul truck and closed it while everyone's looking for a motorcycle. They go down I-95 with the motorcycle. They throw the gun in the river, get rid of the bike. I don't know if they tagged the bike or chopped it or whatever they did with it. But one of our thieves was the getaway driver on multiple homicides, and we knew this. So once we took that case down with the stolen vehicles getting shipped to Shanghai, it's like, you know, you're going to jail for murder, right? And then he started singing like a bird and was able to fill in the pieces. I drove him to this homicide. I drove him to that homicide. He got a sweetheart of a deal. I think he got the getaway driver did like 10 years for the enterprise corruption thing with our case, and then for the homicides. And the shooter, we got a conviction up in Hartford federally. And then they brought him into Manhattan, and the Manhattan DA's office got him for like 3-4 homicides, but he's probably responsible for more than 10.
I think one of the things that people ask themselves when they hear about characters like this is, how on earth do they get there? How do you end up becoming a person who is that merciless, that, you know, cruel, that just horrible human being? Do you have any insight on that? I mean, I don't know if you ever actually see that progression, but
there's been people that I've dealt with in my NYPD career, either I arrested or was surveilling or just had to deal with. And I've seen it after I've retired. I can pick up on it, and I'm not a psychic like Rita. They look right through you. I can't explain it, but there's no connection when they look at you, when they talk to you. There's no fear in their eyes. They don't look at you.
They've basically taken you away from being a human being. You're just a factor, or
it's the same as you stepping on an ant pile.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's scary. I've run into it, like not being a cop, you know, down here in Florida a couple of times. I've run into somebody and I've gotten a bad vibe off of them. Like, this is not the type of person to screw around with, or they just, you can tell that. And I don't know if that means like they would snap and hurt you, or if you wrong them, that they would, you know, plot your demise until they found the right opportunity to, you know, get you. But that guy in that case was one of them. And after we had arrested him and charged him with the homicides, his girlfriend had a car that was stolen. And I grabbed her with the stolen car after he was in jail. And we, you know, grabbed her with a stolen car. And I was debriefing her, and I was trying to get, because, you know, he's living with her. She can fill in a lot of blanks. You know what I mean? Because I'm sure there was pillow talk. And she would not. And she goes, listen, you do whatever you got to do to me with that car, you know, because we were going to charge her with the car. She goes, I'm not. She goes, if he ever got out of jail, I go, he's not getting out of jail. She goes, I'm not getting involved in, like, she would not. We could have given her 10 years. She was not. She was that afraid of him.
Wow. Yeah.
It wasn't love. You know what I mean? It was
right,
fear.
right. Yeah, pure fear. It's really an incredible thing. Now, we're talking about very negative emotions here, but it's really incredible thing just how emotionally driven the human race is. I mean, you particularly are seeing it in the stories that you're telling, but reason doesn't enter into a lot of stuff where humans behave. We like to think that it does, but it really doesn't. I mean, there's a perfect example of it. She wasn't reacting rationally. She was reacting, I'm just terrified of this guy.
Well, she was in survival mode.
Yeah.
She was that afraid of him that it was, you know, in the off chance he gets off on a technicality, she knew him that well, and she was that afraid of him that she knew he would hunt her down and get her.
Yeah. So I guess that in that sense, there's a certain degree of reason involved in it, but it was clearly driven by the fear. Yeah. So, all right. Well, that's a good story. We got time for one more. Give us one more story. Pick one that, like, to you is like that's the story. That's the one that stands out above the rest.
But what do you want to hear? Like funny or
your pick?
All right. In my book, NYPD Law and Disorder, there's the opening chapter is called Embarrassing Moments. And every author likes to paint themselves as a hero in their story. They save the day in the nick of time. Okay. So that arrest I was telling you about earlier, I stop a cab. There's 3 guys in the back seat of the cab, 4 kilos of coke. So I'm parading around the station house with the 4 kilos like I won the Stanley Cup. Everybody's smoke up my ass, taking photos of me with the coke. It's a big deal. Everybody's telling me I'm going to narcotics. I'm believing my own press clippings. So that night, before I speak to the district attorney, there's a food court across the street from the Bronx courthouse. And it had just opened. So I'm like, great. They had a little Italian restaurant in there. I'm going to get some food. I'm sitting there. I'm in my uniform. I'm all puffed up. I'm, reflecting on these arrests. I'm eating my chicken parm and spaghetti or whatever I was eating. I've had a bad stomach my whole life. The next thing you know, I'm like, oh, God, I got to use the bathroom. I got to take it done. The bathroom across the street in the Bronx courthouse is a dungeon. It's filthy. There's no toilet paper there. I'll use this brand new food court bathroom, right?
Yeah, sure.
I walk in. I take off my gun belt. I hang it on the hook in the stall. I drop my pants. I sit on the bowl. I'm getting ready for liftoff. And the next thing I know, I hear through the front door of this bathroom, the door kicks in, and I hear 4 or 5 teenagers, and they're roughhousing. They're hitting the hand dryers. They're turning on the water. They're beating each other up. Kids screwing around. So I go, I better hurry up and finish. Yeah, I'm a cop. I'm in uniform, but I got my pants down to my ankles. I'm kind of vulnerable, right? All of a sudden, it gets quiet. I'm like, did they stop? Did they leave? And something told me to look up. And when I looked up, one of the kids had gone into the next stall. He jumped up on the toilet, and he's reaching over the stall trying to grab my gun belt.
Wow.
So I said, oh, shit. So I jump up with my left hand trying to pull up my pants, and with my right, I grab him by the neck, and I pull him. Well, when I pull him, I inadvertently pull him over to my gun belt, and now he got my gun belt.
Oh, my God.
Oh, shit. So now I let go with my left hand. My pants go down to the floor again, right? And it's a hockey fight. I'm punching him in the face, let go of the gun belt. His friends run into the next stall. They grab his legs. And I got a tug of war going with the gun belt with the kid. Right? Finally, he drops the gun belt. It falls to the floor. They go running out. I pull up my pants. I hook on my gun belt. I go running out into the food court. They're gone. And like I write in the book, what was I supposed to do at this point? Call the police on myself? The Bronx is a small place. The cops that showed up would tell everybody.
Of
even
course.
If I caught them. And I would have been the laughing stock of the Bronx. Like, you see that cop over there? That's the guy who he almost lost his gun in the store. So I kept that story to myself until I wrote NYPD Law and Disorder, and that's the opening chapter, embarrassing moment.
That's crazy. Wow. Yeah, that is embarrassing. And it's embarrassing and it's terrifying all in the same moment. I mean,
it was terrifying.
You got multiple emotions going on there, and they're kind of in conflict with each other. Although I imagine that the terror probably was more motivating than the embarrassment part at that point.
50-50.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I have to tell you, Vic, this has been really fun. I've enjoyed interviewing you, and I'm sure our listeners have enjoyed hearing your story and so forth. You have the 4 books so far about your experiences as an officer. Tell us the titles and how they can be found and all that.
Sure. So you got NYPD Law and Disorder. It's got a picture of a cop scratching his head with a bad guy escaping out of the back seat of a police car. That happened. And that's the book that's got the toilet story in it. NYPD Through the Looking Glass, stories from inside America's largest police department. That's a behind-the-scenes look of what goes on in the NYPD. The NYPD's Flying Circus, Cops, Crime, and Chaos. That's about wild stories about guys I work with, including a guy that stole a horse and carriage to a ride through Central Park. No, that really happened.
That really happened.
Yeah. Confessions of a Catholic high school graduate. That's about me growing up in the Bronx and me being a little son of a bitch until I figured it out and straightened out my life. Grand Theft Auto, the NYPD's auto crime division. Everything you wanted to know about the stolen car industry and was afraid to ask. And then my first book, Dickheads and Debauchery and Other Ingenious Ways to Die, is about the ridiculous things people do to shorten their life expectancy. All my books are paperback. They're $10 each. They're all on Amazon. So just go to the Amazon book section and type in Vic Ferrari. They'll come up. I don't write in chronological order, so they're all short stories. They're great travel books. They make great stocking stuffers. They're $2.99 ebook download. That's
beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. 2 more things I got to tell you. First of all, number one, on behalf of everybody who's listening, I know Neil would love me to say this too. Thank you for your work as a first responder, because you're one of the people who have really done great things to help people in a number of ways. And then something I make a point to tell also my guests, and this is true for you too. You have told your story to many people who, you'll never meet them, you'll never see them, but your stories affected people. They help people. They perhaps entertain them. They gave them new perspectives and so forth. And I think we all, those of us who are in this giving type of an industry, deserve recognition for that. So on behalf of those people you'll never meet, never see, thank you for what you've been doing, both as a first responder and as an author. We all really, really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I really do. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. And we'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.